Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to day 5 of our July webinar series from Woodburn Accountants and Advisors about getting ahead of the growth opportunity in China. To recap a little bit, what we were talking about this week was the following. We are seeing a lot of companies over the last 17 years that have not gotten their foundation for China right. And as a consequence, have spent more time and more financial resources on fixing things in regards to that foundation versus focusing on growth and focusing on getting ahead of the growth opportunity that exists in China. So on Monday, we were reflecting on protecting your brand, a mistake that I have done in the past, and getting that registered, getting all of your assets, your brand assets, your patents, your copyrights protected. On Tuesday, we were looking at the key decisions that have to be made around company establishment and around the structuring of that, so that again, things are done right from the start versus spending time and resources on it later on, where your focus is then not on the business, but it's on fixing things within the business. On Wednesday, we were looking at how to communicate with your Chinese accountant, a pain point for many, and looking at how vital an accountant should be within your organization. Yesterday, we were looking at HR issues and creating a sound HR foundation for your organization, looking at how to find talent, select talent, negotiate with talent, and moving on to how to employ that talent within China. And today we're going to look at another pain point, which is in relation to the corporate management, the people that need to be appointed within the organization. So there are not so many people that are on today, so I'm going to not really go into this slide. It is Friday, I understand that, but it is always nice to know who my audience is, their background, and how much they do know about China. So even if you're watching this on replay, it's always good to know who's watching. So comment or let me know, are you a newbie, are you a startup, or are you an experienced China hand in China? From a technical standpoint, we're going to have a Q&A at the end. There might be more people that filter in today, and if so, it will be basically you ask first come, first serve. The first questions that get asked will be the first ones that get answered. Don't be shy. There is no dumb question when it comes to China. So if you need clarity or more information or more detail, use this opportunity to ask away. We are using Zoom meeting today. So if I run into any technical issues, it does take about a minute to 2 for me to reboot, reconnect, and I will be coming on to finish today's presentation. If anything happens to our audience, just log off, log back in, and hopefully that works for you. As mentioned, this is about your time spent, so use it wisely. And again, if you've got any questions, let me know. I am your China expert for the week. Unfortunately, there are no guest speakers this week, so allow me to introduce myself. My name is Christina Kohler-Colucci. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I am a leading expert on inbound investment into China. I've got 17 years, almost 18 years of on-the-ground experience, specifically out of Shanghai, helping 100% of my clients who are foreign investors with their market entry, pre-investment advisory, implementation, and growth in the Chinese market. The types of services that we do is everything from an administrative perspective, so everything from trademark registrations, corporations, PO services, recruitment, all the way through accounting, tax, payroll, outsourcing, corporate governance, etc. And the beauty right now that we're seeing in China is that we have been able to create system processes and methodologies regarding all of these aspects that will create the foundation of someone's business, so that it gets easier and easier to implement that and make sure that it gets done. So this week has been a focus on those methodologies, and today we are looking at the last one, which is choosing the right people for your corporate management and how to select those people. If you are interested, we have launched a book on Amazon called The 9 Superpowers to Succeed in China. It is a book that can be used at any stage of your China journey because it highlights 9 principles that every company should abide by when going into a new jurisdiction. So these principles could also be applied if you were to go into India or Brazil. There are 9 superpowers that I've related to with the Chinese market. And it gives insight on the right use, what right tools do you need, giving you tips on how to create your own roadmap, because every company, every industry, every sector is going to be different. How to create your own roadmap to make sure that you are crossing the T's, dotting the I's, and thinking of everything so that your foundation for arriving at business is there. The book can be found on any Amazon platform. Just type in 9 superpowers to succeed in China. So let's get cracking on today's presentation. So it's the last day of the July webinar series, and today we are looking at how to choose the right people for your corporate management in China. As I mentioned, there is fear from these individuals about what type of liability and responsibility they will have within the corporate management structure in China. Many fear jail time, many feel being arrested, many feel like they might get caught in immigration. There is tremendous concern from a personal side of holding these positions. And as a consequence, it does not push companies forward in terms of getting ahead of the growth opportunity, because they are at this roadblock of not being able to find the right people for the organization. So let's get cracking on the topic. What are we covering today? We're going to cover a couple of case studies because I think the key is we always want to learn from other foreign investors that did it wrong. So I'm going to highlight a couple of case studies. We're going to look at starting off with the shareholder. Who are you going to appoint as the shareholder? Who are you going to appoint within the corporate structure? What are those roles? What options do you have? What are the responsibilities specifically for each of those roles? We're going to be talking about allocating the power and how to mitigate risk. And then we're going to look at a couple of action plans to finish off. So, setting up a company in China, what roles are in the corporate management? I'm starting off with this before I hit the case study so you can kind of see the terminology that we use in China. All right, so what are the roles? So the action plan for this series is figuring out who to appoint for which roles. Okay, so number 1 is you've got the shareholder, which is the entity or individual that's going to be holding the subsidiary in China. Then you've got to figure out who's going to be the authorized signatory of that shareholder. So in larger organizations, you might have a board of directors might have multiple directors that have equal voting rights. And as a consequence, you might need 2 to 3 signatures. Either way, ideally, you want to choose one authorized signatory versus having multiple signatories. It gets very complicated if you do that. Then you have either a board of directors, which is going to be a minimum of 3 people, or you will have an executive director. Then you will have a legal representative. Then you will have a general manager, and then you will have a supervisor. So this is your corporate management structure for your China company, okay? So my question, if we would have been a little bit of a larger audience, and being that it's summer, a lot of people are on holiday, so they're going to be watching this on replay. But my question to individuals would be, who has a fear to hold any one of these positions for the China business? Who is scared? I would have loved to have gotten more feedback from the audience in this regard. Unfortunately, we don't have such a large audience today. But if this resonates with you and you do have a sense of fear of holding these positions, then obviously listen in to the rest of today's webinar. But also, if you've got any questions, right? Fear can be alleviated if you talk about that fear to somebody. I sometimes joke that I'm a China therapist, because I try to calm people's fears down. But obviously, the more that you talk about certain things, the easier it is going to be to get your head and your mindset around the fact that there's nothing to worry about, as long as you implement corporate governance within your organization to protect yourself and protect the company overall. So who should be the shareholder? Okay. Is it going to be an individual, or is it going to be a company? Now, there's no right or wrong. There's no right or wrong answer to this, all right? Whether it's an individual, whether it's a company, it's an internal decision that has to be made. If you were going to analyze this, I would look at a couple of things. One, the liability. Are you going to have less or more liability as an individual? Are you going to have less or more liability if it's a company? If you look at tax optimization and you decide at some point that you want to sell shares, change the shareholder, get more investors, whatever it might be, from a tax optimization perspective in all of those transactions, what is better? Is it better to be an individual that it's a shareholder or a company that's a shareholder? From my perspective, in general, it is better to have a company act as the shareholder to your China subsidiary than it is as an individual for a variety of different reasons. Everything from tax optimization, long-term vision of how the China company is going to grow, all the way through to just very simply liability and having the weight of a Chinese subsidiary on your shoulders as an individual. For me, I would have more fear in that scenario than I would if it was a company, right? Many companies also consider, again, as a further protection, to consider having an offshore holding company act as the shareholder. And I touched on this in Tuesday's webinar. So offshore holding companies are becoming obsolete. It's not a trend anymore to do this. People have the ability to invest directly into China. You don't have to set up these intermediary holding companies. And it's getting trickier to actually have those for a multiple of reasons. One, because you will not have necessarily a operational structure in that holding company, which basically means that it's going to have no economic or commercial substance. And in that case, you won't be able to benefit from the double taxation agreements. You may eventually want to sell shares, add investors, and if there's an indirect transfer of assets through that holding company, you might not be able to benefit from the tax rates being offered. And then you've got to look at the place of effective management as well, considering that that holding company isn't going to be operational. And the fourth point that I haven't mentioned here is something which irritates me the most, is when are you actually going to be profitable in China? Because if it's going to take 5, 6, 7 years to be profitable, why have an offshore holding company, which is going to be one of the reasons why you have one, is to make sure profit sits in that company. Why would you spend money on maintaining and administering that offshore holding company if you're only going to be profitable in 5 or 6 years? It means 5 to 6 years of service fees from a corporate service provider when you don't actually need that entity and it's doing absolutely zero for you. Thinking about it from a cost perspective. How much does it cost to maintain a company that does nothing, but may do something when you're profitable? And if you do a proper tax planning, you might then gauge when that profitability might appear. But until then, why are you spending money on maintaining that company? So you need to think very carefully on who that shareholder is going to be. Like I said, is it going to be an individual? Is it going to be your head office company? Is it going to be an offshore holding company? Again, no right or wrong to this. It's just analysis has to be made into what is the best for you, your company, in the short and in the long term. Hong Kong has always been known as the gateway to China, so it'd be misleading if I did not mention that here as being part of the shareholder. Many people use Hong Kong as the gateway to China. Now they're using also using it as the gateway to East Asia, right? Singapore is used more for Southeast Asia and Hong Kong is used more for East Asia. It's important to know that China is not the only market in Asia. It is probably one of the biggest, but it's not the only one. And as I see companies grow in China, but as I see companies grow in general with their international expansions, it sometimes is interesting to create a regional hub, an Asian regional hub in Hong Kong that caters to China, but also then caters to other Asian countries. Australia is included in that, by the way. So it's everything East Asia. Again, you have to make an analysis. Does it make sense? Can you afford it? Will it be operational? What will that structure actually do? So now that we've looked at the roles, very on a superficial level, we've looked a little bit more in detail about the shareholder. You might have a bit of understanding now about the terminology that I'm going to use in these case studies, okay? So I'm looking at these 3 case studies to show you where companies have done things wrong. These are war stories, ultimately, okay? So the first one is in relation to high turnover within the corporate management. What do I mean by that? I mean that this was a company headquartered in Canada, incorporating their company in Shanghai. It was a subsidiary. Within the first 2 years of operation, they spent over 80,000 RMB in legal fees to change the internal corporate management structure. Why? Because in those 2 years, they had continuous resignations in C-level positions within the headquarters, which impacted then the corporate management structure that was required for China. They made their structure complicated in that they were a small organization, family-owned business, but they took people from different departments to be included within a board that then had a legal rep, that then had GM, and then somebody separate for the supervisor. And they had turnover in Canada, and as a consequence to that, they had to continuously change, because the minute that somebody either resigns or is terminated, you need to take that person out of your China corporate management structure and replace them with somebody immediately. Okay, cannot wait. It has to be done straight away. Otherwise, you will run into difficulties if signatures are required, and signatures will be required if changes are going to be made within the company structure in China. Okay, so, you know, if you are a leader, a manager, and you want simplicity, then you should create a structure in China that is simple, where you know that signatures can be given easily, that you know that those individuals are permanently within the organization, so that you don't have to spend money from your budget, which are already in the startup phase is critical to your business development and growth. I mean, this is 80,000 RMB from their budget that they had to spend on just simply legal fees because they couldn't get the corporate management structure right. 80,000 could be used on marketing. It could have been used on an additional headcount. It could have been used on so many other things related to the growth of the business, but it was spent on legal fees, right? So again, I always believe in smaller organizations, simplicity is the best. Try to appoint people that are stable within the organization, that are permanent within the organization, so that you don't run into difficulties. Case study 2 is termination of individuals that are in the corporate management structure, okay? So in this situation, what happened is that it was an Italian SME, established a Shanghai subsidiary, had it for a number of years. The legal representative who was appointed was Italian. He relocated to Shanghai to manage the subsidiary, and he was also the appointed general manager. So he had 2 roles within the organization. He was the legal rep, and he was the general manager. Now, the Italian headquarters decided to terminate his employment. So they were looking purely at the employment agreement, forgetting that in the government system, he was appointed as the legal representative and GM within the corporate management structure of the company, which meant that a couple of months after he was terminated and left, they needed to do a change within the organization. They needed his signature and weren't able to obtain it. And because the termination wasn't done well, it was done in quite an ugly fashion. The terminated party, former legal rep, refused to sign anything for the company, refused to do any form of favor. which meant that we had tremendous difficulty to get anything accomplished for this company down the line. Now, I started to think outside of the box. Okay, what are we going to do? We can't reach him. He's anyway not residing in China anymore. Maybe we'll just tell the government that he died. Maybe that'll be the easier way. But the government checks this. So even if you try to think outside the box, it doesn't always work. So in this scenario, they asked to see his death certificate to prove that he was actually deceased. And as a result, we had to file, again, legal fees had to be spent because a formal filing had to be done that this person was terminated due to XYZ, was an ugly termination. And as a consequence, they cannot do anything which is preventing them to grow in the organization. They need to place this individual within the corporate management, but they had to go to the actual courts to get this accomplished. Again, legal fees, things like that, which ultimately they could have instilled some corporate governance, not involving the legal rep, the former legal rep, where they could have actually done that change much easier. Case study 3 is no replacement for individuals that are in the corporate management. So this is a case study of, again, an SME, a small, medium-sized company in the US that incorporated their subsidiary in Shanghai. They had a legal representative who was the head of Asia Pacific operations based in the US. Logical choice for the role, no issues there. However, he resigned from the company. Not terminated, he resigned, he found a new job, and he decided to leave the company. And before leaving, he said to the company, please remove me as the legal representative. For 1.5 years, the company could not find a replacement or did not choose a replacement for this individual. And so for 1.5 years, where he was not even employed by the company, he was listed as the legal representative of the Chinese subsidiary. And at some point, he got so frustrated because he, in his new job, he was also in a role for APAC, and he had to travel to China. And he didn't know what was going on in his old company. He wasn't sure if there were going to be legal issues. I mean, you don't know what's going to happen. And what he didn't want to occur was that he arrives in China and immigration stops him for whatever reason because of his old job. So he actually ended up threatening to sue the company and saying, if you don't remove me, I will sue you. I will sue you in the territory of China. And again, what happened is that for this company that was my client, because they didn't find the replacement, they had to incur legal fees because they were being sued by the previous legal rep because they could not find that replacement. And ultimately, the reason was nobody wanted to take on that role, which is ridiculous. Then exit the market if you are not feeling secure in China. But don't leave a poor guy who's actually resigned from your organization in that role and give him that responsibility. It's unfair. So ultimately, eventually, they because of the suing that occurred in China, it pushed them to actually find a replacement and get that all done and set up. So you can see from these 3 case studies that there is poor decision-making being done in the head office. There is not proper follow-through happening within the corporate management structure. And ultimately, people don't take it seriously, but yet nobody wants to take that role. Let me repeat that, because I think that's something I want to emphasize. People don't take it seriously, but nobody wants to take on that role. Right? It's unfair. So let us look at the corporate management structure. All right. You have 2 options when it comes to the corporate management structure. You've got the option on the left and the option on the right. The difference between the 2 is, you will see, is the board of directors versus the executive director. Everything else is exactly the same. So if you look at the left side, we'll start with that. You've got a shareholder that you've chosen. From that shareholder, you've got an authorized signatory. That shareholder is going to appoint a board of directors, which is a minimum of 3 people. Then normally the chairman of the board will be the legal rep. And then you will have a general manager that can also be the chairman of the board, legal rep, or it can be somebody different. Separate from that, you have to appoint a supervisor. Nobody from the board or the legal rep or the GM can be the supervisor. It has to be someone completely separate. Okay. So in that structure, you are having a maximum of 4 people appointed. 3 in the board, with 1 member of that board being the legal rep GM, and then the 4th person being the supervisor. In the next option, again, shareholder, authorized signatory, is appointing an executive director who, to simplify things, will also be the legal rep, who will also be the general manager, and then you have a second person who is the supervisor. Okay? So in that structure on the right that you're looking at the screen, you're going to have a minimum of 2 people. Of course, you could have 1 person who's the executive director, 1 person who's the legal rep, 1 person who's the GM, but why complicate things? You could just have 1 person act in all those roles. Again, my philosophy in China is simplicity. You want to appoint people that are stable within the organization, that you know are not going to be leaving, that are permanent, and so that you don't have to do changes. Okay. Now, here are a few questions to ask yourself. Very simple question. Shareholder, who's it going to be? But then who is also going to be the authorized signatory? Are you going to choose a board of directors or an executive director? How do you, and to answer that question, I would almost look at the physical operation of the company you're setting up. How do you want to operate it? Who do you want to sign off on things? And then obviously, who's the appointed legal rep? Who's the appointed GM? Who's the appointed supervisor? So those are the ultimate questions that have to get answered when you're looking at the corporate management structure. The criteria for these individuals: nobody needs to reside in China. There's absolutely no regulation stating that any of these individuals need to be Chinese residents. They can be of any nationality. They can be local Chinese. They can be German, French, Canadian, American, whatever. And they do not have to reside in China. Obviously, they should be responsible for the China business. I would not pick random people from your organization to act in these roles. All right? We need to take these roles seriously. These should be people appointed who are going to be responsible for the China business. The board of directors, by default, the chairman is the legal representative. In some cities, this is a requirement. In other cities, it is not a requirement. And the chairman can also, the legal rep can be somebody else. It does not have to be a board member. Okay. The member of the board can be a legal rep who can also be the general manager. So if you have the chairman of the board, this chairman is also the legal rep, is also the GM. The executive director, if you choose the other structuring system, the executive director can be the legal rep who can also be the GM. Could you have 3 people? Yes, you could. You're just then making it a little bit more complex. Supervisor cannot be a member of the board. The supervisor cannot be the legal representative. The supervisor cannot be the general manager. The supervisor has to be a unique individual that is not. So if I go back to the board, the supervisor cannot have any role on that side of the hierarchy. Okay. So let's look at the responsibilities. Okay. Now the responsibilities for the board of directors is the same as the executive director. And generally, these bullet points that you are seeing here will be the bullet points that are utilized in drafting the Articles of Association of the Chinese subsidiary. I have highlighted in red the key ones that I want to touch on today, which is that the board and the executive director are responsible, which is common sense, the corporate strategy and the company's investment plans. They are responsible for the annual financial budget and the final accounting plans. They are responsible for profit distribution plans and loss recovery plans. They are responsible for the increase or decrease of registered capital, investment capital, whether corporate bonds will be issued, etc. They are also the decision makers. I haven't highlighted in this red, but I'll touch on it, on the future vision of the company, whether there's going to be a merger acquisition, whether there's going to be a dissolution, liquidation, whether there's going to be a change within the legal form of the structure. The board executive directors are making decisions on the establishment of the internal management departments. So basically creating the HR foundation. They are going to be appointing and dismissing the general manager that is in that structure. So let me reflect back on that. This general manager, the board of directors will appoint, okay, not the shareholder. And they will be working out the basic rules and policies of the company, i.e. something that I preach. They will be working out the system processes and operational guidelines, the corporate governance that will be implemented within the China subsidiary. That is written in the articles of association of the company. If you don't do it, that is your mistake. Nobody else's but yours, because you are not taking it seriously and you're not creating a corporate governance for your organization to protect yourself as a board member or as an executive director. You're not protecting the senior managers. And as a result, you're letting people do whatever they want to do in your organization, which may result then in criminal activity or other actions where you then should not be surprised if you're taken to court, you're stopped at immigration, and worst case scenario, you get blacklisted for your company. Okay, so none of this should look weird to anybody. These are normal responsibilities for boards and executive directors in whatever jurisdiction you're working with. All right, it's exactly the same in China. Now, the liabilities of the legal representative. This is more serious because the legal representative is the legal face to your company, okay? The legal representative will be the first person contacted by the government should anything be done wrong. They will be the one that is sanctioned with administrative sanctions or penalties. Worst case scenario, if there is actual criminal, blue collar criminal activity occurring, they will also be sanctioned and penalized and possibly prevented from ever entering China again. So I've highlighted 3 things which are key in this role. If it is found that there are illegal operations beyond the range approved, i.e. outside of your business scope, if the company is concealing facts from the registration and tax authorities and or practicing fraud, if they are withdrawing funds or hiding property to evade repayment of debts. Those are 3 things that happen most commonly in China by senior managers. Then the legal representative will be the one that, again, that is the first person contacted and is the first person that will be sanctioned and penalized. Unless it goes to court and it is proved that the legal rep had no action and no responsibility in any of this, then the person who is officially responsible will be caught, and then criminal activity, this person will be sanctioned and penalized either through going to jail. Obviously, it depends on the offense that is being done. Okay, so yes, being the legal rep can be scary. It can be scary when you read this, but there should be no illegal operations occurring if you got corporate governance. Fraud should not be occurring if you if you have a sound accounting system and a sound accounting platform, and you are checking your tax declarations, you're checking your books, your P&Ls, your balance sheets, you're checking all of this and raising questions to make sure that nothing is going wrong. And obviously, if you see transactions that are abnormal, like i.e. withdrawing funds or hiding property, then again, raise that red flag immediately, not waiting months on end, right? So as long as there is the corporate governance, there's absolutely nothing to worry about. Because anybody who holds this role in the UK, in the US, exactly the same thing would happen to them. Okay. What are the responsibilities of the general manager? So again, I've highlighted 2 things here that I think are just the most important. One is that the general manager is there to supervise that the business operations of the company are being implemented. So whatever is being drafted by the board of directors or the executive director, the general manager's responsibility is to implement that and execute that. They are also there to execute the annual operational plans and investment plans. They are there to actually execute the operational guidelines and system processes to be implemented. Okay? They are there to basically execute the running and the operation of the organization in China. And I just want to reiterate again here, none of these roles have to be based in China. So you can be a general manager of your Chinese subsidiary. You're recorded in the government system as being the general manager. And you've got that role where you need to have oversight over what is going on in your China business, which is why I said, don't just pick random people from your organization. It should be somebody who's actually in the business. But it does not mean that you can't hire a local GM whose title is also general manager, who has a name card with general manager, to go around and act as your general manager. It just means that you are adding a resource in your head office that's going to be appointed in the government system as GM and is responsible for all of these functions. What is the role of the supervisor? Okay, again, the supervisor is an external person away from the board, the legal rep GM, or the executive director, legal rep GM, okay? The role of the supervisor is that this person reports to the shareholder on the activities that are occurring within the company. The supervisor is there to actually supervise that the board of directors, executive director, legal rep GM are doing their jobs. All right. The supervisor is making sure that the company is remaining in compliance. So they are inspecting the financial affairs of the company. So that's the tendency, is to find things through your financial recordings, through your bank accounts, through your bank transfers. They are also supervising the performance of the board of directors, legal rep GMs, to make sure that the operations are transparent, that there are no compliance issues, that there are no kickbacks, for example, that are occurring, and everything is clean. Ultimately, the supervisor is there to make sure the company is clean, that the company is in good standing. That is their role. So the tendency for me with supervisor is that either you appoint your CFO, finance director, finance manager, into that role, because they will have an overview over the financial records of the Chinese company, or at a minimum, they should have. Alternatively, at Woodburn, we offer this, and I know that there are other competitors of mine that do the same. I act as a supervisor for our clients' China subsidiaries in many cases, where then my team does the outsourcing solution of the accounts, and we raise any issues that occur within the operational system processes related to the finance aspects of the company. And usually through that, we will look at the paperwork, look at the types of trade transactions, service transactions going through the company, and make sure that there are no discrepancies and that everything is clean and everything is in good standing. So those are the responsibilities. And look, I want to emphasize, none of that should seem like, oh my goodness me, like, what is that? That's too much work. It's so weird. It's not. Those bullet points are identical to whether you're sitting in Hong Kong. I mean, the titles might be different, but the responsibilities are the same for any corporate management in whatever jurisdiction you're setting up. Is the same. All right. So how are we going to mitigate risk? Well, let's look at power of authority. Okay. We are going to be appointing individuals to these corporate management roles. Right? And delegating that power always requires a degree of trust. We've got to trust those individuals on taking those roles, which is why I'm saying it drives me insane when people don't take it seriously and yet they don't want to actually hold the roles. It's such a defeating mindset, okay? We got to take on those roles because our thought process is to push growth in China. We want to make money. We've got to delegate work. We've got to delegate that power to people we can trust and who are loyal to our organization. That does not mean, though, that we can't mitigate risks in some shape or form. So let's look a little bit at how we can mitigate risk. So you could also mitigate risk by not involving the legal representative, who's the legal face of the company, too much in the daily operations. Like that, the legal representative, it's clear to see from his responsibility listing that he's not involved in the day-to-day actions. He's not a decision maker within the company. And as a consequence, if he is the first person that is being contacted, his risk is mitigated because he's like, well, I'm not involved in the day-to-day operations. You can't sanction me or penalize me. I don't know what is going on. I just sign off on things, right? I don't always think that's wise, but it is an option that you can choose. Foreign investors may consider appointing a legal rep that does not reside in China, but whose signature is only required 2 or 3 times a year. Again, just to mitigate the risk, because this person does not know what's going on within the China business. And also to mitigate risk, and this is not just with the legal representative, but anybody who's appointed within the corporate management structure, is to ask for signed copies of signature sheets that are undated for security purposes, in case they're going to be terminated and you need their signature to show that they have resigned and left the company so that you can put in a replacement. Now, you might find people not willing to sign off on a blank piece of paper because you don't know what it's going to be used for, but don't forget that these signed copies of signature sheets can be kept at a legal office, at a law office, or at a corporate service provider's office, where they are secured for this purpose of something not going right. Okay, so they can be secured basically by an outside party that is neutral to the situation. Allocating power to the general manager. Again, this can, allocating power and mitigating risk can all be assigned within the Articles of Association as well as the employment agreement. For me, appointing the general manager within the corporate management structure, I wouldn't appoint somebody you don't know. So for example, if you're looking to hire a local general manager, I wouldn't make this local guy who you've just met and interviewed maybe 3 times as the general manager within the corporate management structure. You may want to add him in a couple of years' time, once you know he's loyal and he's staying, but right from the beginning, I wouldn't take that risk. I would not initially give new employees access to critical licenses and shops that are associated with the company. I would have that kept by an external party because you don't want people to steal those and misuse them. So a lot of investors can hire third parties, again, like legal firms, corporate services firms, that maintain custody of the company kit, the licenses and the legal documents around your company, together with all of the seals and chops to make sure that they are not being misused. You can limit the powers of the general manager in the Articles of Association by, for example, capping the amount of money that he can manage. So for example, approval is not required for transactions that are under 10,000 US dollar, but anything that is over, if there's a single transaction over 10,000 US dollar, he needs approval. Again, that's all about creating a operational guideline or a management directive booklet for your senior managers to know what they can and cannot do within your company. And then you may want to mitigate risk by maybe not initially giving him access to the bank account where your money is actually being kept. You need to carefully plan who the signatories are going to be on your bank account. Not that, again, you hire a general manager, you've only met 2 or 3 times, he's allocated in the government system as general manager, plus he's a bank signatory and has access to your funding, and then runs away with it. Or makes transactions to himself that are over and beyond his salary levels. Okay? Again, these are very simple principles that actually should not shock anybody. I mean, if I were to open a business in the US, I would follow these same principles. I'm not going to hire somebody new in the US who's going to have access on day one with my bank account where I'm funding the project so that he can run away with it. You're also going to implement and policies to mitigate that risk. So whether you're going to set up in China, India, the US, Canada, or Germany, you're probably going to implement exactly the same principles. Nothing new here, guys. Allocating power to use the company chops. Now, for those of you that don't know, company chops in China are have more power of authority than signatures do. So it is very important to know who is keeping your chops. Do you have a logbook being kept for the use of your chops so you know on what date and for what chops were being used? Because whoever holds the chops has the power to sign off on contracts, to sign off on resolutions without telling anybody from the head office. Okay. And obviously, when you are setting up your company, only one set of chops are being issued. They are registered. And what we want to avoid is the forging of any chops as well. Okay. So just a bit of background so you understand what the chops are. When you set up a company, there are 6 chops that are produced. The company chop, finance chop, contract chop, although the contract chop is not as commonly issued anymore. So you just use the company chop. You've got the invoice chop, customs chop, and the legal representative chop. So you'll have at least 5 chops, if not 6. And the question then is who has access to that? Who has the power of those? And ultimately, a tool that you can create is having a logbook, tracking how these chops are actually being used. So let's talk about action plan. All right, questions. And again, this action plan for me is to make you think about how you're physically going to operate your company in China, how the corporate management is going to be involved, and how your local team is going to be involved. And again, there's no right or wrong here. The goal, though, is to mitigate risk, to have corporate governance instilled within the company. Corporate governance will be instilled through operational guidelines and system processes that are written down, read by everybody, signed off by everybody. Okay. But what should you be asking yourself about the actual operations of the company? Who or what is making the investment into China? Who is going to be the decision maker for the Chinese operations? For example, who's going to read contracts? Who's going to operate bank accounts? Who's going to decide on customers, suppliers, logistics providers? Who will be the CFO, finance manager of the local subsidiary? But who is that also in the head office, and how are they going to be involved? Who is going to be the bank signatory? Who will be approving payments? Who will be authorizing payments? Who is going to keep control of the company chops? I'd also like to add there, who's going to keep control of the business licenses that are issued and all the company documents that you will collect with board resolutions, etc. And that's it. I mean, that's really looking at the operational side of your business, right? The fundamental compliance aspect of your business. Bank account, licenses, chops, which are used on contracts, who's making decisions, who's approving payments, is it a team of people, is it one person? And again, you know, I would create an organogram to understand who is everybody involved. Who are all the people involved in the China business? How are they involved? What responsibilities do they have? You can then at that point place those individuals very clearly into these roles. Of course, as an individual, you have to accept on taking those roles, right? Again, for me, I've been 17 years in these roles as executive director, legal rep, GM, and I am also a supervisor on a number of my clients' companies. I don't have fear because I make sure that there is corporate governance. I make sure that the corporate governance is executed. I track it and I check it. Because I don't want liability to fall on me, right? So I, as an individual, also check that that is happening. So if you are appointed in those roles, you should also be checking that the corporate governance is implemented, that the operational guidelines and system processes are there. It's your responsibility to do that as well. And again, I get frustrated when people don't take these roles seriously. They spend absurd amounts of money on fixing it, where they could have used that money in the business. Again, to get ahead of that growth opportunity, to make money. Instead, you're using it to fix things, which is frustrating for everybody. So that's the end of today's presentation. I believe it was quick for a Friday. I would love to hear what was your biggest takeaway from today, even those that are going to be watching this on replay. What did you learn? What would you do now for your investment into China? Do share with me. And also, if you've got any suggestions on how to improve the presentation in terms of content, let me know. I try not to make them as complex as possible. I try to simplify them so they're easy to understand. In regards to this specific topic, how you can work with me is that I can act as a supervisor on our clients, on companies, on subsidiaries that are registered in China. With that, though, we have to do the accounts and the full outsourcing solution so that I have the ability to track and check if there are any red flags. You can also appoint me as a non-executive director, where I'm not appointed in any of the corporate management roles, but I can come in as a non-executive director to verify that everybody is protected, that there is corporate governance instilled, and that it is being executed. I can also help in other areas of the business so that getting ahead of the growth opportunity is always on the agenda. And I can help advise on who to appoint within the corporate management structure. And like I said earlier, I can also act as the China therapist to calm people down if they have a certain level of fear of holding those roles as well, and explain to them what they mean, what are the risks, but also what are the advantages. So if you would like to reach out to me and book a session, I'm going to because there are a couple of you that are on today, I'm just going to copy these details, put them in the chat box, and then you can have them. Hold on, there we go. You can reach out to me at any point to have a discussion. There are no questions that have popped in, so it must have been very, very clear for Davide and Donnelyn. If you do have any questions, I'm going to stay on for a couple more minutes, so feel free to ask away. If everything was clear, just write clear, then I know. And just to let you know, I'm going to be off on a holiday finally at the beginning of August, so we won't have our single webinar then, but we will have our August webinar series from the 23rd to the 27th, all about setting up a company in China. We will be looking again at the China Incorporation Blueprint. So again, the key decisions will be popping in once more. We're going to look at how much startup capital is required for your business, what your registered office address in China should look like, how to appoint, again, the right people in your corporate management structure, and how to open your corporate bank account in China. All right. So if you are planning on setting up a company in China, this is the perfect webinar for you, because not only will you have the overview of the China Incorporation Blueprint, but we're going to be taking certain aspects of that to look in depth at those, what they mean, and how to make that your decision around that. So I hope today's presentation was useful. Again, I'm happy that Davide and Donnelyn, you joined me today. And for anybody who's watching on replay, feel free to reach out. Have a fantastic weekend. Take care and goodbye.